The New York Islanders have re-signed Samuel Bolduc to a 2-year contract. But how does that affect the team and Scott Mayfield? We've got that and a lot more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to thank everyone for making Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can also now hear us on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On Islanders. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We have got a lot to discuss on today's show, but first, if there's something Islanders related on your mind, if you have a question, a comment, maybe something you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, feel free to send us an email. The email address is lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever it is that's on your mind. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Isles. And you could follow me, Gil Martin, on Twitter at Ice Wars, NYRVSNYI. We're going to keep you up to date on all things Islanders throughout this busy and important offseason, from hirings, firings, trade rumors to the draft and free agency. We will have it all covered for you here on the Locked On Islanders podcast. So the Islanders actually made a move on Tuesday. They officially announced that they have signed defenseman Samuel Bolduc, who was going to be a free agent. They signed Bolduc to a 2-year deal worth, according to Cap Friendly, $800,000 a year. And the big impact of this, more than anything, is that this is a one-way contract, which means that Bolduc is going to get his $800,000 whether he plays for the New York Islanders or the Bridgeport Islanders. And that kind of gives the Isles organization a little bit of incentive to keep Bolduc around, whether he becomes the Islanders' everyday sixth defenseman or a third pair defenseman, or whether or not he ends up being a black ace and being that seventh D-man. That remains to be seen, and he's going to have to earn that roster spot and that spot in the lineup. But it shows a vote of confidence from Lou Lamoriello and the Islanders front office. Now, we all know Bolduc's story, second-round pick by the Isles back in 2019. 6'4", 220 pounds. He's got great size and made his NHL debut with the Islanders last year, playing in 17 games, had a pair of goals, added an assist. He had 2 penalty minutes and was a +5. Played pretty darn well during the regular season. Also appeared in the first 2 playoff games against the Carolina Hurricanes. Kind of struggled with the speed and the intensity of playoff hockey, but that's not a shock for a guy who had only played 17 career NHL games. Bolduc, 22 years old, won't turn 23 till December, so still young, and we all know defensemen tend to take a little bit longer to develop, so he's still young kind of for a forward even, but definitely young for a defenseman. And look, in Bridgeport, 56 games, 10 goals, 35 points, 31 penalty minutes. And one of the things that Bolduc gives you that I think adds a little bit more to the table for the New York Islanders is that Bolduc is able to give you something that Scott Mayfield cannot, and that is he can be effective on the power play. And that is important for this team. And, he's a left-handed shot, so, Mayfield is a right-handed shot. Bolduc would not directly replace Mayfield if he goes, but he could replace him as a member, at least, of the third pair defense. And having Bolduc there kind of opens things up to make another move for the Islanders. So Bolduc, this was a big season for him. The fact that he did play on the power play in Bridgeport and even did play a little bit on the power play for the Islanders, not a lot, but a little bit. I think that is kind of important. And, it gives the Islanders a little something more. And, again, assuming that no big-time puck-moving defenseman comes on, I could see Bolduc battling with Sebastian Aho and, to a lesser extent, with Noah Dobson to quarterback the power play. We know Dobson struggled in that area. Hopefully, he bounces back and gets better as he gains experience. Aho kind of was a little better, I think, as the quarterback of the power play than Dobson was, at least from a technical standpoint. But, it'll be interesting to see what Bolduc can do. And now for sure, Samuel Bolduc is going to get a long look in training camp from the New York Islanders and have every opportunity to go out and make this team. Because, look, whether or not Lou Lamoriello is able to bring in that puck-moving defenseman or not, Bolduc, to me, has some big, big advantages over Sebastian Aho. And let's start with the obvious. That would be the size. And you start with the size, and then you have the way he plays in his own zone. Bolduc can give you a lot of the offense that Aho can, and he's better in his own zone. They're both left-handed shots. To me, if he shows more maturity, if he shows more ability, he can make this team, whether Mayfield is back or not. He may just be battling Aho for that last spot on the third pair. And I think his ceiling would be a second pair defenseman once he's a little more acclimated and comfortable at the NHL level. We have got more to get to on today's show. We will talk about how the signing of Samuel Bolduc to a one-year deal affects Scott Mayfield, because it does. We'll talk a little bit about Semyon Varlamov and a little rumor going around about his future. And we will continue our player-by-player look at the Islanders as we discuss Arno Durando's season and future with the team. We've got all that and a lot more still to come on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. Lots of things to bet on right now. Baseball in full swing. You a Met fan, Yankee fan, certainly a lot going on there. And then you've got futures for the NHL, the NBA, the NFL, college football. So don't miss your chance to snag a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. So Scott Mayfield, still an unrestricted free agent. Islanders have said they want him back. Still don't know whether or not they'll be able to afford him. I still believe Mayfield is better off. From a strictly financial standpoint, he'll get more money elsewhere. Whether or not it's better for him to take a little less money to stay on the island where he's more comfortable, where he knows the team, where he knows his role, that remains to be seen, and that would be up to Scott Mayfield. But we all have talked, everydayers, we've talked about the contract situation, the Islanders' lack of cap space. Right now, the signing of Samuel Bolduc gives the Islanders insurance in case Scott Mayfield does not return and in case Lou Lamoriello is unable to bring in that puck-moving defenseman that gets the team to the next level. Could Bolduc help in that area as far as moving the puck out of the defensive zone into the neutral zone, transitioning from defense to attack? Maybe. Again, probably take him a little time to get experience, and he would need a little bit longer of a little more patience and leeway from the coaching staff than a lot of other players have gotten in the past in order to do it more consistently. But now you still have 7 defensemen, 7 NHL caliber defensemen. Again, Parker Wotherspoon is an unrestricted free agent. Whether or not they re-sign him remains to be seen, and whether or not Mayfield comes back. But even if Mayfield doesn't, you've got 6 plus Robin Salo. If Mayfield does, you've got 7 plus Robin Salo. So it really does help, and we'll see whether or not it gives the Islanders a little more leverage in Mayfield's situation. I still think Lou would rather have Mayfield back, all things being equal. But right now, Bolduc, to me, I think he has a very bright future. Again, I think he'll be a solid second pair defenseman in another year or two, and I think that'll help the Islanders. And, it makes it a little less urgent, perhaps, for this team to re-sign Scott Mayfield. Doesn't mean they don't want to, doesn't mean they shouldn't, but it gives them a little bit of an edge. Wanted to briefly talk about an email. This one is from Pete from Rochester. Hi, Gil. Pete from Rochester, New York here. I've been traveling the last 2 weeks, haven't been able to keep up with the podcast, but I binged them today. And wow, I'm just reminded of how much work you put into it and how much value you bring to us fans. I know all teams have their issues to deal with this in the offseason, but it seems the Islanders just have so much more to do. You do a great job of breaking down the issues and the options to improve the team. Thanks for all that you do. And Pete, thank you very much. And regarding today's episode, which I believe is the Tuesday episode, I'm in full agreement in moving either Brock Nelson or J.G. Pageau. Both are of high value to the team, but moving either could bring back value that is needed to improve in other areas. Pete, first of all, thank you so much for the email and for the kind words about the show. I'm so glad you enjoy it. I've been thinking about it since I did the show yesterday, and every day, as you could check it out, you know what we're talking about. But I believe that a trade is realistically the only way that this organization is going to take a step forward. And I'll take it to a different level. It is one thing for Lou Lamoriello and management to say, I believe in this core. I believe in the players we have. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But it can't be that you believe in the core so much that you're unwilling to make changes that will improve the team. And realistically, the only way this franchise is going to take a big step forward is to bring in either that puck-moving defenseman or that goal-scoring winger. And the only way you can do that is to probably trade one of your centers and then either buy out or trade away part or all of Josh Bailey's cap hit and then add in a trade or in free agency a player who fits either the puck-moving defenseman or the goal-scoring winger description. And, if you have 5 centers on your roster right now and you trade one and you bring in the wing, Bailey frees up to $5 million in cap space. Pajot would free up another 5. This is, how you get it done under the circumstances. This is how you improve your team and make it better. If you bring back the same crew, only they're a year older, without a lot of young players to step in and improve the team that way, it just gets real difficult to get better. It would really require, like Oliver Wahlstrom, for example, to take a big step forward, and maybe Samuel Bolduc, and certainly Noah Dobson. But then you're starting to pile if after if after if, and you also need that cap room down the line to re-sign Ilya Sorokin. So to me, the trade route really makes the most sense, and I am hoping that Lou Lamoriello does that. And look, we know Lamoriello not going to say a lot. Hopefully he'll do something to make this team better before training camp opens up in September. Wanted to briefly touch on a little bit of information about Semyon Varlamov. Pierre Lebrun of The Atlantic said it would not surprise him if Varlamov signs a 2-year extension sometime this summer with the New York Islanders. The estimated AAV for that deal between $2 and $2.5 million. So Pierre Lebrun agreeing with what we've been saying every dayers, over the cost of the season. And that would say that the Islanders goaltenders would cost them less than the $9 million that they had last year for these two players. Varlamov, as we know, back on getaway day, said, "I want to stay with the team. Nothing has changed. I have a good feeling about this team and about the future. I want to be a part of it." We know about the close relationship between Varley and Ilya Sorokin. So it really does look like it makes a lot of sense to see Varlamov back at a reasonable cap hit of $2 to $2.5 million. And now it just becomes a question of getting him to sign on the dotted line. And again, knowing Lou, it is very possible that a deal has already been signed and we won't hear about it until sometime on or near September 1st. We have got more to get to on today's show. We continue our player-by-player look at the Islanders with Arno Durando. And, by the way, a member of all 4 Stanley Cup teams is our Islanders birthday of the day. We've got all that and more still to come on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. So we continue our player-by-player look at the Islanders roster. And, this is, by the way, the last player that we have to look at on this series. So every day, we've been doing this pretty much since early May, and it's been about 6, maybe 6.5 weeks of player-by-player analysis. Today, Arno Durando, the forward, left wing predominantly, 24 24 years old, won't turn 25 until January, native of Montreal. And Durando made his NHL debut with the Islanders, played in 4 games, averaged 13 minutes of ice time, was a +1, did not score, had 2 penalty minutes, but he had 2 block shots, 3 hits, 1 takeaway, and no giveaways. His +1 came in a win against the Pittsburgh Penguins in what was his NHL debut back on February 20th. And, he had 9 shots on goal in 4 games. And this is the thing I like about Durando. He hustles. He's not afraid to shoot the puck, and he's not afraid to be physical. To me, he is a solid bottom 6 player. And if you look at where he's at right now, Durando under contract this year for $762,500, and then he's a restricted free agent next year as of now. You look at the 4th line. I mean, Ross Johnston is getting paid $1.1 million to not play hardly at all and is 29. Matt Martin, $1.5 million. Cal Clutterbuck, $1.75 million. I would be more comfortable with Durando than Ross Johnston being available to come in and play 4th line or 3rd line minutes if any member of the identity line or Hudson Fasching or Zach Parise, if he's back, any of those bottom 6 guys, if they're injured, to me, bringing in Arno Durando makes a little more sense than Ross Johnston, who does what he does well, but is limited elsewhere. So, look, I think Durando is one way to save a little bit of cap space if the Islanders are willing to trade a member of the identity line. If not, he will probably be in that same role where he plays at Bridgeport, and he played 68 games for the Bridgeport Islanders, 24 goals, 55 assists. Both of those are professional career highs for Durando. And I think, he's a guy who once you, even if you get Clutterbuck and Martin staying on the team this year, if then their contracts expire, I think Durando would be a very solid fit on that 4th line in another year. And you could even save a little bit of cap space if you move them in this year and move out one of those 2 veterans. I know they're fan favorites. I love them too. But we're trying to talk about what's better for the team. And, to me, even getting rid of or moving on from Ross Johnston would save some cap space. And if Durando becomes your black ace, I could understand that as well. So I think those are the 2 possibilities for Durando. He will get a nice, solid look in training camp. Probably get the feeling he starts the season in Bridgeport, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him at some point during the season. Time now for our Islanders birthday of the day. And today is the 69th birthday. Boy, that makes me feel old. A former Islanders forward, Bob Bourne. Bourne drafted in the 3rd round by the Kansas City Scouts, also drafted by the Indianapolis Racers of the World Hockey Association, and was acquired in a trade with the Kansas City Scouts, who then became the Colorado Rockies, who are now the New Jersey Devils, in a great steal by the late, great Bill Torrey. Made his NHL debut with the Isles in 74-75, had back-to-back 30-goal seasons in 77-78, 78-79, had a career-high 35 goals and 76 points in 1980-81. And boy, he really did step it up in 3 of the Islanders' playoff runs. In 1980, 20 points in 21 games in the playoffs, including 10 goals for Bob Bourne. in 1982, 16 points in 19 games, 9 goals, and in 83, 28 points in 20 games, 8 goals, 20 assists. We go back and look at one of his big playoff moments with the Islanders, the NHL quarterfinals, game 2 at the old Boston Garden. Islanders and Bruins, Billy Smith and Jerry Cheevers, a pair of Hall of Fame goalies. This was a fight-filled game. The big battle, Terry O'Reilly and Clark Gillies going at it. You also had Al Secord, Mike Milbury, Bob Lorimer, Dwayne Sutter. A lot of fights in the first period of this game, but the game tied 4-4, goes to overtime, and Bob Bourne scores the game-winning goal in overtime, just a minute 24 in, to give the Islanders a 5-4 win and a 2-0 lead in the series, which they would go on to win in 5 games. And both of the first 2 games in Boston were overtime wins for the Islanders. Bourne also had an assist in this game and had 5 shots on goal. Bob Bourne, a member of the core of the 4, is our Islanders' birthday of the day. I want to thank everyone again for making Locked On Islanders your first listen every day, everydayers. Tomorrow on the show, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the alternatives Lou Lamoriello has. We're getting closer to the draft, so we'll look at another player who the Islanders could pick with the 49th overall selection, and maybe some other trade options as well. Until then, have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. And, of course, let's go Islanders.